All right, welcome to Truth Be Told. We want to welcome everybody to another episode. I'm Tony Sweet. We have Captain Ron in studio with us, and we have a great show for you guys today. We have Dr. Michael Shermer, is the publisher and, I guess, editor-in-chief of Skeptic Magazine, which I'm very, very happy because our healthy skeptic, Captain Ron, is with us today, so it should be a great show. He is also a presidential fellow at the Chapman University, where he teaches Skepticism 101, and I would love to take that class. He is the author of Why People Believe Weird Things, Why Darwin Matters, The Science of Good and Evil, and the Moral Arc, and his brand new book, and I'm going to show that book so you can see it, Heaven on Earth. The scientific search for the afterlife, immortality, and utopia. So,
yes, Tony, I don't think you've even scratched the surface for what this guy's done. I'm so excited to have him on the show. I really am. This is as excited as I get about Truth Be Told, let me tell you. Before we thought today we would ask Dr. Michael Shermer to talk about some of the different things we talk about on the show and get his skeptical viewpoint on them for about 20 minutes, and then would go into his book for the last 40 minutes of the show. But before we actually even start, Doctor, if you wouldn't mind, since it just happened 48 hours ago, and I know you know a lot about, you've done a lot of research regarding gun control and guns in this country. Since we just had the shooting 2 days ago, could you speak a little bit to your feeling on this mass shooting that just took place? That was a horrible tragedy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's every few weeks. I think the average is I think it's every 2 weeks. It's like 24, 25 a year is the average for mass public shootings, is what they're classified as, 4 or more in a single active shooter incident. So, well, I really have no good answer. No one does. The problem is that, there's 350 million guns in America. There's fewer humans than there are guns in America. And, and it's not like they're evenly distributed too. I read a stat the other day about I think it's like 3% of the population owns like 90% of the guns. So,
wow. Kind of like the money. That's like the money.
Right.
Yeah, it's like a power law, 20% have 80%, and it's even more than that. And the problem is, of course, there's a black market for these things. You can get them, well, actually, they're pretty easy to get legally, apparently. Even assault rifles like AR-15s, and those are easily modifiable. So I really don't have a good solution. I mean, the idea that we're going to have a buyback program like Australia did, it's just never going to happen. I mean, the number of guns they had, were in the thousands or tens of thousands, not hundreds of millions. So, we're not going to take the guns away from Americans. The Second Amendment's not going to be overturned. There's been 2 Supreme Court decisions in the early 2000s that solidified handguns as is protected by the Second Amendment. Anyway, so legally, practically, nothing's going to happen. So, I mean, it would be nice if, they had sort of a tighter net on the background checks for mental health, for example. If you see something, say something, actually does seem to work. The same day as the shooter in Florida, there was another one, I think it might have been New Jersey, where the kid's grandmother came across his...
in a journal.
Yeah, in his journal. He wanted to break the record for the most people shot up. It's one of the problems of advertising or publicizing the killer's name. This is what they want more than anything. And that, if you want to be famous in America, there is nothing that will guarantee it happening more quickly than a mass public shooting. You go from complete obscurity to famous overnight in just in 6 minutes in his case. Hollywood can't even produce that with a hit movie.
Right.
So, it's the motives are base, and we can't change that. It's part of human nature, the desire to want to be somebody, and most people can't. And then so other issues of rage or mental illness, and then all those guns, and then you throw in the mix alcohol, drugs, and whatever else triggers people. We don't know in this case what this young man's problem was specifically that day, but obviously he'd been building up to rage. And so there's people that study all these things. What about gun controls? What works? What doesn't work? Background checks does stop some, but the problem is you can't stop 100% of them. Right. And so you're going to get a few that leak through like that. that like restricting guns from say guys that have had restraining orders put on them. They can't get guns. That seems to help. Most women, the majority of women that are shot by their intimate partners, either husbands or boyfriends. And, so there's a few things here that nudge the arrow in the right direction of fewer homicides. But really, mass public shootings are in the statistical noise in terms of the number of people killed compared to just regular homicides.
Right.
Regular homicide. Well, if you count intentional homicides, accidental shootings, and suicides, it's about the same number that are killed every year in automobile accidents, which is 33,000 or so. Wow. So if the goal is just to save lives, then mental health for suicide people, antidepressants, things like that. Accidents, just more training on keeping guns secure. And homicides. I mean, most homicides are moralistic in nature, or when they happen instrumentally for drug gangs and things like that.
I think there's a homicide going on behind you. I think there's a homicide there.
I know. Sorry.
No worries.
He's a good little guy. Anyway, so. But we know, for example, that the homicide rate of America is about 5 times that of Europe. Ours is about 5.5 per 100,000. In Europe, it's about 1 per 100,000 homicides. But it's not like Americans across the board are 5 times more homicidal than Europeans across the board. No, it's that ours are concentrated. Again, it's like the power law. Like 1%, or like 90% of the homicides happen in like 5% of the areas in the United States. Inner cities. Where there's a lot of illegal gang activity related to drugs, things like that. And because drugs are illegal, there's no free market, and therefore there's no contracts, there's no judicial system to settle disputes. So there's a black market, and where there's disputes that can't be settled by the courts or the police, then the disputants settle the disputes themselves, usually with arms. And so that drives the crime rate up when the guns are available. So drugs are not as big, and guns are. Most European countries don't have guns. I mean, just people don't own guns. It's just not a.
That's an American thing, no doubt.
Well, I mean, here this is Tony, and I have to say, I grew up in Kansas, and I shot guns from the time I can hold them in my hands. I mean, my parents were hunters, my grandparents, and all the way back till they came to this country 200 years ago. But I feel that so many people, they're scared of guns, but I grew up that my dad said, listen, if you don't know how to handle a gun, you don't use a gun. And I feel that, and I feel that today. We actually used to have to take courses just to get a hunting license to have a gun. So I still feel that not everybody should just go be able to get a gun, but actually you have to take courses and learn. You have to learn how to drive. You should learn how to shoot.
But these dirtbag criminals aren't going to
treat guns exactly like you would a driver's license or a pilot's license.
Right.
You gotta re-up every year.
Right.
Get your license. Show that you've had your training and practice.
Well, there's something we could do right there.
I think it's a great point.
Absolutely. Yeah, but good luck getting that passed. The NRA.
Right. That's the problem.
The NRA used to be an organization devoted to gun safety.
That's the NRA is what I used to take the gun safety class.
Right. Now they're devoted to buying off politicians to support gun manufacturers. It's just a lot.
In a nutshell, that's exactly what it is. Right. All right, let's move on, Michael, if you would, please. Why do people believe weird things?
Well, the short answer is that we believe things that we for non-smart reasons. That is, why do smart people believe weird things? Most of us believe things for non-smart reasons, for emotional reasons, for just our backgrounds, our political preferences, our religious biases, our emotional preferences, and then we back into it by finding evidence that fits what we already believe and ignoring the evidence that doesn't fit. So this is called the confirmation bias, where you look for and find confirming evidence what you believe, you ignore the disconfirming evidence. So our brains are more like lawyers than scientists. Science takes training. It's just natural to find yourself slipping into the mode of only paying attention to articles or op-eds or commentators or blogs or podcasts or newspapers or whatever that are going to support what you want to believe. So, if you're a conservative, you watch Hannity or you listen to Rush Limbaugh or whatever, you read the Wall Street Journal. If you're liberal, you read the New York Times, you watch Rachel Maddow, Bill Maher, and so forth, and NPR radio maybe. So the problem there is that you might be wrong about some issues or even all your issues, but how would you know if you're in the bubble? Right. So this is the problem with, that we've seen with social media. It's making the bubbles even tighter, harder to get into, feeding, that confirmation bias. Just these automatic news feeds that pop up on your push notices on your phone or on your Facebook feed and on Twitter, who you happen to follow. You're selecting, or it's being selected for you, even worse, only the things that are confirm what you already believe. So that's why, so people believe weird things because we have to believe things, and we believe lots of things, and we don't really have a natural fact-checking module in our brain. There's no skeptic in there. So that's why we need skeptics. We need, fact checkers. We need editors. We need in our brains. We need somebody to say, hang on there, Shermer, you might be wrong about this.
One thing that I've noticed that more and more people, and I don't know if it's the internet or social media, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but conspiracy. I mean, so many people nowadays are doubting the government, conspiracy theory. I mean, I always had my doubts, but it seems like everybody's talking about now. Why do you think that is? Why do you think so many people are conspiracy theory emphasizing?
Well, I remember it being pretty common even in the 60s and late 60s, early 70s when I was coming of age in high school and college. There were lots of conspiracy theories. Just now with social media and the internet, there's more of them. They're more prominent.
You can talk about it faster.
Unfold in real time. Yeah. It really that new phenomenon started with the 9/11 truthers, right, launched by this internet film called Loose Change.
I watched it.
Yeah, everybody's watched it. I mean, and most people say, okay, I know some of it's crazy, but what if only 10% of it's right? Then oh my God,
right?
Okay, maybe none of it's right.
What is that? What you think? What do you think?
Oh, I think most of it's nonsense.
Okay.
The vast majority of it's nonsense. Yeah. So, but here's the thing about conspiracies. This is not like perpetual motion machines or psychic power, or whatever. They can't be true. Conspiracies do happen. I mean, the examples I like to give: Lincoln was assassinated by a conspiracy. Mm-hmm. World War I was launched by a conspiracy. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand of Austria by this Serbian nationalist cabal called the Black Hand. They met in secret. They got their weapons. They plotted where they're going to stand on the street corner and shoot him and so on. That's a conspiracy. Watergate was a conspiracy. Gulf of Tonkin, kind of a conspiracy. And since the WikiLeaks, even President Transparency, Obama, all this stuff was going on under his watch. Mm-hmm. These things we didn't know until the WikiLeaks came along, and that's a kind of conspiracy. So the thing that bothers me about people like the 9/11 truthers and the JFK people, they go so far out on the limb there, so far off the rails, really, that it's misdirecting people to focus on where things really happen. I mean, money in politics, lobbyists. I know most of this is legal, but I mean, there's plenty of illegal stuff. The Russian hacking of our election, if that happened or whatever happened, those kinds of things do happen a lot. And so here's my little kind of baloney detection kit for conspiracy theories is, the bigger the conspiracy, the less likely it is to be true. The more people that have to be involved to make it come up, the less likely it is to be true. I mean, most people are incompetent. They can't keep their mouth shut. They bumble and fumble and screw up. They chicken out and so on, so the more elements that have to all come together at just the right time, the less likely it is to be true. So like 9/11 truthers, it's so unlikely for it. In fact, their theory is pretty much impossible because for this simple reason, we know the planes hit the World Trade Center buildings. We've seen them on video. And their claim is that in addition to the planes hitting the buildings, a secret cabal of people got in there and planted explosive devices like an implosion of the building. And they happened to do it right on the same floors that the planes hit, at the angle that the planes hit, that the floors would collapse, the buildings would collapse at those floors and down. this is impossible. The probability of these two events, the planes being flown into the buildings by hijackers and a secret cabal of conspirators getting inside the buildings to plant explosive devices, impossible. So right there, you don't have to know anything more than that. Just the probability argument shows you that's not possible. Not to mention, that how many people would have to be involved to do that. I mean, dozens or hundreds, and these are in two of the most secure buildings in the country. With police and guards all over the place. And we know what it takes to demolish a large building. You got to break through the drywall. You got to get to the beams on the inside. You got to wrap the beams with these explosive devices. How would anybody not see this happening?
Doctor, let me ask you this. How do you know who to be skeptical of? You seem very skeptical of the 9/11 truthers or whatever, the change guys, versus the mainstream viewpoint. We have a mainstream viewpoint, or certainly our president has been saying that Russia absolutely did not meddle in our elections. He's been saying that's fake. It's a hoax. And our president says that. And yet today they've indicted 13 people Russians for exactly this.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, okay, so I think most Americans, most people are fairly clear about which sources are pretty trustworthy and which aren't. The hard part is in the middle. So the obviously trustworthy ones: New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Time, Newsweek, The Economist, mainstream media, mostly get it right, and they do make errors and they correct them, and you have a sense that there's some integrity there, some fact checking, some editing. And then there's the complete, crazy ones, the Alex Jones of the world that just sit there and make up
which our president used to go on there.
Yeah. I know.
I mean, it's hard to imagine.
So, and then in between. So, well, one of the encouraging things that's developed in the last decade or so are these political fact-checking sites. It really began with Snopes, who started debunking just urban legends and myths and things like that. But then they started migrating over into the political world. And since then, there's sites like PolitiFact, that rate in real time, fact check in real time politicians' speeches, true, maybe true, not sure, maybe false, pants on fire. And
then Fox says that's not true, even though they show that it's true. So what do you do about that?
Well, what do you do about it? We live in a free society with a free press, so we can't go down the road of, well, we should censor some media, but we can fact check the media. We can shame them. We can rate them. We can, like on an Amazon, how helpful was this article kind of rating system? We could do stuff like that, and and then it kind of emerges. Certain sites are trustworthy. Certain sites are obviously not trustworthy. And the kinds of criteria we want to look for, like who do you trust? Well, who has a track record of being trustworthy? Who has a track record of lying a lot? Right. And we do have an evolved neural network that pays attention to lies and lie detection. We kind of know what to look for when somebody is lying to us. And so we're not terrible at it. We're not great at it either. But in time, reputations do matter to us because they accumulate how honest you are, how dishonest you are over time.
Okay, Doc, if you would mind just indulging Tony and I for just a moment here. This show, obviously, we talk about all these different kind of topics, conspiracies and paranormal and whatnot. Can we just hammer a couple of these things real quick out to you, and you just kind of give us the quick answer?
It's like the lightning Jeopardy. I'll put the Jeopardy
before we get
on.
into your book, because I want to cover your book, but let's just quickly hammer out, just so our listeners, because they're interested in all these topics. You got one there, Tony?
I do, and I'm going to show you. You have the picture up already. That's the Patterson film.
Oh, yeah, Patterson film. Well, we now know this was a fake. It was a guy in an ape suit.
Is that what you think? Oh, okay.
Well, anyway, somebody confessed to that. They said it. They did it.
But why aren't you skeptical of him?
Yeah. Oh well, it's possible because people do make up stuff like that. I mean, as we know from the police, when they announce that a crime's been committed and they're looking for the perpetrator, they get inundated with people that call and say they did it.
Yep.
So, false confessions is a real thing. But in this case, I think I'm willing to believe that there's a Bigfoot if you show me the body. But until then, grainy videos and blurry photographs and stories about things that go bump in the night and films.
Hey, we're with you. We've had guys on here. Go ahead.
Well, no, Captain Ron is always saying this, like, with technology and everybody has a cell phone camera and the cameras are even better than some of movie film. It's like, why do every time they take a picture of a UFO or Bigfoot, it's always blurry?
And the Patterson film's 50 years old.
Yeah.
So in that last 50 years, nobody's got a better piece of footage. Come on. So I agree with you.
And we're a decade now into cell phones, and maybe 5 years to high definition,
that's what I'm saying,
high quality video cell phone. If anything, the number of sightings and the quality of sightings should be going up, but it's not. It's going down. So that tells us that Bigfoot's probably not real. Same thing with aliens landing on Earth. The UFO sightings have been going down. If anything, they should be going up. And so that's an indication. I can't prove there's no Bigfoot, there's no aliens landing on Earth.
Well, that's interesting. What do you think about the abductees?
The abductees, well, that's a different phenomenon. These are people that have weird experiences while they're sleeping. The stories that they tell about being abducted always come to light when in the middle of the night when they're asleep. So this tells us this has nothing to do with aliens and everything to do with human psychology.
What about when they're driving down the old dirt road?
There's one story like that.
So you just think that it's the person is delusional, is what you're saying?
That particular story, the Betty and Barney Hill story, driving down the Lonely Road.
Correct.
By the way, why the aliens never land at like at the White House or Dodger Stadium or something? Just make it obvious, okay?
Obviously, they're trying to be clandestine. That's an interesting question.
Well, these stories, they almost always come out either under hypnosis, like that one did with the Betty and Barney Hill story, or they come out later, and then you press them on it. And it's like they were either hypnotized to recover the suppressed memory, or it was a dream. It was a kind of a dream.
Right.
And that's not evidence because for science, because we know that people, make up stuff all the time, either intentionally or consciously, just as part of a dream. And, even it doesn't matter how detailed the stories are of what the spaceship looked like on the inside and so on. Science fiction writers give great detail of what the Millennium Falcon looked like in Star Wars.
Sure.
Having an imagination to carve out a detailed story doesn't mean anything.
I'm with you. I will say that John Mack's work showing that people, obviously it's in our culture today. There's been 1,000 movies, but John Mack's work showing people from a long time ago did recount very similar stories with very similar things from other parts of the world that couldn't possibly have talked to each other, like from Africa and whatnot.
Well,
that's an interesting.
And historically, in the Middle Ages, people talked about
correct.
Being abducted in the middle of the night, but it wasn't by aliens; it was by demons. Incubi and succubi were harassing them in their beds in the middle of the night. And so, what we think it is something called sleep paralysis. In sleep paralysis, you wake up in the middle of a dream. That is, you're still dreaming, but you're waking up as part of the dream.
Right.
But your body is in a position, you're supine, you're laying flat, super relaxed. And this is why a lot of people have floating and flying dreams, because your brain is interpreting what your body is doing in this super relaxed, flat position. So, and then in addition to that, there's this element of, it's kind of like a sex dream, like a wet dream or something, and then there was a sensed presence in the room and it was having sex with me and this sort of thing. It's very common in narratives throughout the centuries. It happens to maybe 1% to 3% of the population that has sleep paralysis. And it's just an incredible phenomenon that people have this. But the culture tells you what to call it. So, centuries ago, well, these were demons. These are aliens.
Yes, I've read that in Communion. Whitley Strieber spells that out, how it's the same thing. There's even something before demons. There was another, fairies or something, where it just, in their world view, that's what they called it.
Right.
And it's the same experience going down. So
Right. The problem is that we can't sense our brain operating, so you don't know that it's all in your head. It just feels like it's out there. The schizophrenic that hears voices, the voices to them are outside. They're out there coming in. They're not just being generated inside. And so, that's the problem. So we have to attribute it to something. So I attribute it to this outside source, even though that's not really what's going on.
You got one, Tony?
Well, one of the most famous, conspiracy theories that, actually in 2017 with the release of the documents for the JFK assassination, what is your thought on who killed JFK? Do you think it was just Oswald himself?
Yeah, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Absolutely, 100% sure of that now.
Wow.
Vincent Bugliosi's book really, did it. Before that, Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed, really did it. I mean, these guys really addressed each and every one of the conspiracy claims and either debunked it or showed that, by itself, it doesn't prove anything. And the alternative, the JFK conspiracy people, they have no candidate. There's no suspect. It was just like some nebulous, the FBI, CIA, the KGB, the mafia, the Cubans, the Russians. It's like, well, but who? That way, there had to be a second shooter, and so all these things are addressed, and little things like that. Oswald got a job at the book depository building that was on the parade route. What are the chances of that? He must have been planted there by operatives and so on. No, Posner tracked this down, that he got the job there before Kennedy even announced he was going to Dallas, much less before. It was even before they picked the parade route. So that was by chance. Much of history turns on chance and randomness like that. I mentioned the assassination of Franz Ferdinand that launched the First World War. That was a botched job. These guys were all lined up to shoot this guy, and they missed. One of them chickened out. Another guy shot and missed. Another guy threw a hand grenade. It bounced off the trunk and blew up the car behind them. And so it failed. And so the Archduke and his wife went to the hospital to visit their comrades that had been hurt in the explosive device in the car behind them. And then when they went back on the parade route backwards. And the assassins were still just sitting there, just like, well, that was a screwed up job. And then here he comes. So they went, okay, bam, shot him. That's just pure chance and stupidity. And often history turns on those kinds of things. And also, there's kind of a cognitive dissonance we have between the size of the effect and the size of the cause. We want them to match. So, the Holocaust is the worst genocide ever in history, committed by who? The Nazis, the worst regime in human history. There's a match there. But JFK, most powerful person in the world, killed by who? Lee Harvey Oswald, just nobody. Yeah. Like this is why people struggle with Princess Diana. Cause of her death: drunk driving, speeding, no seatbelt. These are the three most common forms of why people die in automobile accidents. But princes are not supposed to die like that, So it had to be something else. The MI5 and the royal family, or the Arabs, or whoever. And so all of this distorts the way we think about conspiracies. But in reality, in a free society like America, living in the nooks and crannies, a nobody is who would get away with it. And a somebody, a big, powerful organization, is going to have a much harder time.
Sure, it's the hiding in plain sight thing, yeah. Listen, there's a lot of these, obviously I feel the same way about most of these conspiracy theories. There's a couple that I feel are stronger, and I like elements of the ancient astronaut theory. And one of the elements in there is how they have these like 1,200-ton blocks in Baalbek, Lebanon. And they have these other megaliths that they've lifted from the top of a mountain, down a valley, and up to the other side of a mountain. How do you think that was done? I've never heard a good explanation for that. Not that I'm saying aliens did it, but I mean, I don't know how it got done.
Yeah, so, monumental architecture, we have a pretty good idea, archaeologists have a pretty good idea about how this is done. First of all, a lot of manpower. Most of these civilizations had either slaves or slave-like labor that was super cheap. And like in Egypt, for example, they can work 365 days a year, almost never rains. And, they had super cheap labor. We know where the laborers lived because we've now found their houses and their toilets and their tools and so on. All that stuff's there. And we know through attempts to replicate this that you can do it with enough time and manpower. If you have enough people hauling big blocks over rolling logs and things like that, or up dirt ramps with enough people pushing and pulling, it can be done. We know this like on Easter Island. It's another example of that where this has been tested. And what I think we struggle with is we can't conceive of how it's done. This is the argument from personal incredulity. I can't imagine how this could be done. It just seems impossible. Look at the size of those blocks. Look how much they weigh. Me and my 10 buddies, we're never going to do this. But I feel that way when I look at the Empire State Building or a jet airplane or whatever. How is this possible? This gigantic jumbo jet is 35,000 feet off the ground. It just seems, I can't conceive of how this is done, but it's done. Human ingenuity and so on is pretty remarkable. So I think rather than indicting our ancient ancestors as being bumbling idiots that couldn't figure out how to build a block of stones, and therefore attribute it to something else, a super advanced lost civilization or an ancient aliens.
Well, see, that's my point exactly, is that it's like, why can't it be interesting enough that we've lost the technology to do that? That's almost as fascinating as the alien thing to me.
It is. I think it is. I think it's remarkable what ancient humans were able to do before modern technologies, because that we know that a lot of things we know they did for sure, and that alone is pretty impressive. So that's our species. I mean, really, it's still us. We haven't evolved that much. They had the same size brains we had. So why not give them the attribution of being able to figure these things out, given enough time and manpower? So, collective action like that is very potent over time. So the problem also, I've spent a lot of time on this particular subject. I did a long podcast with Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock, who's kind of the
love that guy.
Both of them.
Yeah, he's a super interesting guy, and he's not a kind of extreme wacko aliens guy, not at all. And he focuses now on Göbekli Tepe, which is this 11,000 to 12,000 year old civilization. Well, so it's a site, probably a spiritual site in northern Turkey, and it predates by thousands of years. All the other monumental architectures. They have these gigantic T-shaped, like 20-ton T-shaped stones
with the animals on them, and
it's pretty impressive, really impressive. But to me, the take home is not ancient aliens or ancient lost civilizations, but like, wow, our timeline of how early hunter-gatherers were shifting and becoming more stable and having larger populations with collectivities able to do these sorts of things happened much sooner than we thought. So, much later than we thought. So that's pretty impressive.
No doubt.
To me, to me, it's a little bit like the cave art, in Lascaux and some of the other caves.
Right.
Like, man, these people were really good.
Yeah.
Let's move a little closer towards your book. We're about to go into your book, Heaven and Earth. Before that, the last question would be, almost every major religion in the world has a very similar story like the Christians have of extraterrestrial visitation. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I think that's the religious impulse. This is what Carl Sagan thought too, that there's kind of an impulse that we have, that there's something else out there and up there that knows we're here, cares about us, loves us, created us, or is going to give us everlasting life. And sorry, it's a long day. And I think that's right. I think alien. I call them deities for atheists. Aliens are deities for atheists. It's like, I don't believe in God, but maybe there's something up there. And when you think about not only science fiction writers, but also like SETI astronomers, the way professional scientists think about what aliens would be like, they're not going to be anything like us. They're not going to be, just barely ahead of us. These stories we hear about Roswell. And so, the spacecraft crashed and we back engineered the technology, and that's where silicon chips came from, and the transistors and all that. But at that time we had, vacuum tubes, and really, it's just kind of a small improvement. It's a big improvement on our time scale, but a small improvement really on the big picture, from vacuum tubes to these silicon chips and transistors and so on. You mean to tell me that aliens that traverse the vast distances of interstellar space and landed here safely, or crash landed and survived partially, or whatever, their technology is just like 5 years ahead of our technology? Really?
Yeah. That's more implausible than that they came here.
Right.
They would be on the same time scale in the 13 billion year window we have.
Right.
They'd be right there.
And on that time scale, that 13 billion year time scale, on an evolutionary time scale, they're going to be tens of thousands of years ahead of us, hundreds of thousands, millions of years ahead of us. And so look what we've been able to accomplish just in half a century, say a century back to telegraph and things like that, telephone. And look what we can do now. Just extrapolate the curves out, 5,000 years, 50,000 years, 500,000 years, a million years, 5 million years. We would seem, like gods to Neanderthals, just with a smartphone,
sure.
a television, whatever, a jet plane to a Neanderthal. We would be God. And so that if we ever do encounter extraterrestrials, they're going to be like gods. Essentially, it will seem omniscient, omnipotent, and therefore, deity-like.
I have two questions, and I definitely want to get to your book. But I always say that the Greek myth and the Greek gods, to me, a lot of the gods that they've created, to me, it was hard for me to believe that they could just imagine this, because for me, when I see something in person, then I can dream about it. And what do you think of the Greek gods? Do you think that they were actually, could have been aliens, because these are like gods greater than life, lightning bolts, flying through the air.
Just like
imagine.
He just said, aliens would appear as gods to us if they were more advanced. Technology would make you appear godlike.
Right. And that's just hard for me to believe that they just made that up.
Well, they animated, essentially, it's animism. They animated all the natural processes, rivers, lightning, storms, rain, wind, everything, the mountains, all the weather, everything became animated. This is what animism is. It's everything is alive, essentially.
Right.
And that it's infused with not just power, but agency, like it's intention. There's an intention behind it. This is why, one of the great breakthroughs of the scientific revolution was to get rid of all this supernatural attributions of everything and just realize that randomness and chance, accidents, these things are just the product of entropy. This is, the universe is just running down. The universe wants to kill you. but it doesn't want anything. There's no intention behind it. It's just what things do. If you don't struggle to survive, you're just going to die. And the natural order of things is to run down, for buildings to collapse, not be built. To build a building, you have to put effort into it. To collapse it, you just have to sit and let it let nature take its course. So in short, our ancestors impugned everything that happened with agency. There's something behind it. Everything happens for a reason. One of the discoveries of modern science is that most things happen for no reason at all, or it's something like disease. These are just bacterial grade or viruses that don't know or care about us. They're just trying to survive too, and they kill us in the process. Or weather, we know it's just what's behind the weather. There's no intention behind it. Sure. But the people then they thought rather differently than the pre-scientific worldview is so different. It's almost impossible for us to imagine impugning everything with agency. And the closest would be something like a modern day Christian who thinks everything that happens for a reason because God wants me to everything.
Right. That's the default answer. Right. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. Such a cop-out.
The person I married, the job I got, God sort of pulling all the strings. But most people don't think that.
All right.
Agreed. Let's delve into the book a little bit.
All right.
Now.
So this book is off the chain. So if you guys haven't picked it up, please go pick up Heavens on Earth. So 74% believe in afterlife. Okay. I have to say I do, for a reason. I'll give you a reason why. And a third of atheists believe in the afterlife. Can you explain that?
Well, the atheist finding is interesting. It's not quite the afterlife. It's the continuation of consciousness after the death of the body. We don't really know what they're thinking. And this one of the limitations of self-report data like surveys and polls is we don't know when somebody ticks a box, what they're actually thinking in their head. So, like, for example, the fastest growing group, religious group in America are the nuns, the people that tick the box for no religious affiliation. Now, they're not becoming atheists and subscribers to Skeptic Magazine. That's a huge cohort. A third of millennials, 25% of everybody. A lot of them are becoming spiritual, but not religious. Maybe they follow Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle, and they're Western Buddhists, Taoists, or Hinduists, or something like that, or they believe like the Star Wars. There's a force out there, and the force be with you, and that kind of thing. There's a lot of New Age thinking still out there that's kind of displaced a lot of mainstream religion. And the atheist one, I suspect, is along those lines, that, the continuation of consciousness after death. This is actually a popular idea I write about in the book on the people that think we're going to upload our minds into the cloud. So people like Deepak Chopra and kind of westernized Buddhists, they believe when you die, your consciousness just continues on in a different form. You don't go anywhere, because in Buddhism, there's no like start and stop. There's no timeline. There's no arrow of time, and there's no place to go. It's all just consciousness, and the physical world is just a physical manifestation of consciousness for a while. So something like that. Your body dies, but the thoughts you have and your memories, they just continue on in this other platform. But even platform is not the right word. It's just consciousness is everywhere. And so that's why I devote a chapter to that in the book, because I thought, well, this is a super interesting idea. And this is, in a way, what the Singularity and the mind uploaders want to do. People like Ray Kurzweil at Google. He wants to copy your connectome and then upload your connectome as the analog to your genome. We're going to copy all your memories and upload them into the cloud and then turn it on or put it in a computer or whatever. And that you'll just be in there. You'll be, right there looking through the little camera. Like Johnny Depp in Transcendence,
right.
remember this story? He's a computer scientist and he gets poisoned with polonium by some terrorists. He's got 2 weeks to live. He copies his brain and puts it into the computer. His physical body dies. They turn the computer on. He's in there looking out. Okay, this isn't going to happen. First of all, not even remotely close to having the ability to do this. But even so, it's not really you. It's just a copy of you, because you're more than just your set of memories stored statically in the synapses between your neurons. It's more than that. It's you looking out through your eyes continuously from day to day. It's what's called the point of view self, POV self. And that's different from the memory self, the mem self, because you're not just a set of memories. You're a continued whole that goes from one day to the next. Now, your consciousness is broken up every night with sleep, although you have dreams. And then general anesthesia, there's a break in consciousness, but you return. So the question is if we copied you and put you in the computer and turned it on, would you wake up like you would after a sleep or an anesthesia? I don't think so. So I think that there's a deep problem having to do with what's called the problem of identity. Who are you? Because if you say, well, I'm my memories. Yeah, but which memories? Because your memories are always changing. Mm-hmm. So like I'm 63 now, and let's say I died. Let's say I'm a Christian and I accept Jesus, and I die and I wake up and I'm there in heaven with Jesus. Am I there physically? Now, some Christians say, yeah, your physical body is resurrected in heaven.
Right. How old?
At what age?
Right.
I don't want to be 90 up there.
Right.
They said you're 30. I said, 30? Yeah, it's a good year, 30. Okay, well, but what happened to all my memories of the last 33 years? Are they gone? Are they in there? So anyway, the thing is fraught with problems that way.
Hey, Doc, hold on. What about, let's go back to the thing you were saying. You put it in the computer, you type in all that stuff. We're moving towards virtual reality anyway, so project this out a couple thousand years, and you've got all that information there. How could you ever distinguish that copy of you from yourself, like the Matrix? Or like Elon Musk thinks this whole thing's a Matrix.
That's right. You couldn't.
Okay, you couldn't. So therefore,
the copy may think he's you,
right?
But you, let's say we did this.
But would Tony think it was me?
Of course I would.
Or would he be able to tell? Seriously, that's the question. Would he be able to distinguish the copy from me?
No. Well, okay. So first of all, we have to make a note. Once the copy is made and you two start living separate, let's say you're still alive. And you lead one life and the copy's leading another life, no matter how closely identical they are, you're going to have slightly different experiences. So your memories will be slightly different. There was a Star Trek episode about this where Riker runs across a copy of himself from decades before, when he was transported up to this other ship he used to work on before the Enterprise. And the transporter malfunctioned, as it does every episode. And so it splits and makes a copy of him, and one goes back to the ship, and the other one is stuck on the planet, and decades later he runs into the copy. Now, the problem here is that the one on the planet is going to have a very different life path than the one that went back to the ship. They're going to have a completely different set of memories from that moment on. So, and by definition, that is two different people. Any more than a twin, leads a similar life to its twin, its sibling, but it doesn't say, well, there I am. That's an exact copy of me. Maybe genetically identical, but they have different life experiences. So they're slightly different. So there's never going to be a perfect copy just from the life path that you take the moment the copy is done.
But would that copy be distinguishable to another person?
Well, let's say...
Would Tony say, well, that's Ron's copy, not Ron?
You know who has fun fantasizing about this is twins who marry other twins, and they fool around with the idea of like, what if we switched? She'll never know. Yeah, she'll know.
Right.
Because there's slight differences,
Sure.
just from the experience you have of acting differently with other people.
That's like mothers that have twins or triplets. Everybody else is like, I can't tell, and the mom's like, oh, that's Bob, that's
Sure.
Jim. I mean, she immediately knows.
Because the differences are there.
Yeah,
they're just a little more subtle.
Right.
So, I mean, it's really science fiction. A lot of this stuff, it's fun. It's nice that that smart people like Ray Kurzweil and big companies like Google are working on it. They have a whole company called Calico. They spent $1 billion on this. Solving the aging problem. It's like an engineering problem.
Doesn't he take like 250 pills a day to try to?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
He's like supplement king. Wow.
None of that's going to work. That's not going to do anything.
I don't take anything.
He's still going to live.
Maybe you're just slightly healthier than you would be if you didn't. But for the most part, it's a waste of money because you can get most of that stuff you need from just a healthy diet.
I've never taken one supplement in it. I'm almost 50, and the doctors always said you're perfect health. So
this guy's not hurting for money, so we're okay.
You're going to be fine, but none of us are going to get past the upper ceiling at the moment. The upper ceiling being about 120 years. Now, I debunk the myth, and early in the book that people live twice as long today as they used to. That's not true. Centuries ago, people lived in their 80s and 90s.
Right.
Just not very many of them.
Right. It's the average age. It's not the age.
It's average. I mean, once you get out of childhood, the chances you make it into 80 or 90 are, orders of magnitude more than the moment you're born. Most of the deaths, the average lifespan gets pulled down by all the people that died in infancy and childhood in the Middle Ages day. So it's not that, that no one lived in their 80s and 90s. Yeah, plenty of people did, just not as many as do today. And so that's what modern medicine and health, and public health and vaccinations, things like that have done. But once you get up into your 80s and 90s, it all starts to go downhill, and it's inevitable. It's going to happen to all of us. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Now, these guys may have a breakthrough, through genetic engineering, maybe a CRISPR program that re-engineers the genes to allow the cells to keep duplicating. This is a problem called the Hayflick limit. Cells have a limit on the number of times they can divide and keep going. And it's usually like 50, 60 times or so, and then the cell dies. Okay, why can't it just keep going? There are some cells that divide indefinitely, and they're called cancer. All right, so this is not good. We don't want to do this and have blobs of cancer walking around. So the technological problems are enormous, not insoluble. But what I'm saying in the book is like, instead of focusing on living 1,000 years, let's just get to more people to 80 and 90 and 100 without cancer, Alzheimer's,
right.
Dementia. Lying in a bed with tubes of a morphine drip. These are the things that matter, not 1,000 years from now.
Let me ask you this, Doc. Have you ever had one of these things you were very skeptical of, and then you've learned that it was true?
Well, when I was a born again Christian for a while, and I not only believed in God, I was sort of a creationist. So when I took a course in evolutionary biology, I thought, oh my God, this stuff is true. I was a climate skeptic for quite a few years, and then I changed my mind about that about 2006 or so, when a lot of the evidence started being accumulated.
So that's real too, because we try to say that on this show, right? Climate change is a real thing. This nonsense that it's not is awful.
That's right. Yeah, it's absolutely real, and it's primarily human caused. Now, the debate, which is completely legitimate, is what should we do about it? How much should we invest in nuclear versus solar versus wind versus geothermal? These are all legitimate debates that are in politics, economics, and science, technology. Fine, but the denial that it's happening that's problematic.
Right.
Agreed.
Well, we're almost out of time, and one thing I want to just touch on is, with your book, did you touch on near-death?
Oh, yeah. I have a whole chapter on near-death experiences and reincarnation, because these are the two claims that there is proof of the afterlife in heaven, and people have gone there and come back. The most famous example in recent years is a book called Proof of Heaven by Eben Alexander, this Harvard-trained neurologist.
Right.
And he claims he had, it was during a coma, when his brain was swelling, and they put him in an induced coma, gave him some drugs to bring the swelling down. So in the middle of this, he had this fantastic trip. Went to heaven. The colors were incredible. The sounds, the beautiful, and just the sense of love, and connectedness and oneness with the cosmos. He goes on and on very poetically. Okay, so in my chapter on this, I start with that, and then I say, now what's the difference between that and say, and then I give passages from Oliver Sacks's memoirs about when he dropped acid in the 60s, and Sam Harris when he, in the opening pages of his book, Waking Up, when he talks about taking, I think it was ecstasy. I think it was ecstasy, where just the colors, the intense feeling of love that I had. What's the difference between these? They're indistinguishable to us outsiders. In science, we have to have some way to test it and see what the difference is. So to me, Eben Alexander and all these other people, they had a real experience, but it's all in the head. And we know you can replicate a lot of the NDE experiences, the floating out of the body, the looking down, the tunnel, the white light at the end of the tunnel. You can do this through, accelerating pilots in a centrifuge so they black out. They report this tunneling effect. And basically the blood is being pushed to the center of your brain. Your visual cortex back here, the blood is shutting it down like this. So you're going to get that kind of tunneling effect and the white light at the end of the tunnel. And of course, you fill in with your imagination. I saw Jesus or Moses or Buddha or Muhammad or whoever you saw. And that's personalized. But the experience of what the brain does when it's shutting down, this appears to be something like that. Now, there is some debate about maybe we evolved this propensity to reduce the anxiety of dying, the dying process, by just sort of making you relax. Like, it's okay to go. Just let go, because I feel like I'm just sort of floating out and going off to this other place. This could be the brain's way of just kind of giving itself an acid trip. Like, boom, let's just pump this thing full of these fantastic drugs, and you just sort of make that transition. This is one theory, anyway. So, but it's not proof of heaven. It's just proof that these experiences happen in the brain.
Do you believe? Because first of all, my grandfather back in the '60s actually did have an experience like that. He died in the hospital. Saw his mother, went through the tunnel, saw his mother, and then she said, "It's not your time." And then my grandmother, he heard her voice say, "Come back," and then he woke back up in the hospital.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yes, I get these reports all the time. People send me stories. It's really quite incredible. And I write about some of my own weird, anomalous experiences I've had in the book. And, lots of people have them. And I think they're fascinating. I think it tells a lot about how the brain works.
Right.
It's proof of an afterlife, though.
Yeah, because I just feel a lot of people nowadays, because they hear about, they've read the books, they saw the television shows and documentaries about afterlife and the tunnels, and now I'm like, well, maybe we're just imagining it. But then I think, then I think about my grandpa. They didn't read the books. He was a minister, business owner back in Kansas, about 300 people in the town. So I knew he didn't see a documentary or anything on it. So that's why I believe he experienced something. Yes,
absolutely. People have real experiences, and they are powerful. They are life-changing, for sure. But the question is, what does it represent?
Right.
Okay? So, well, there's different ways to interpret it. I think the most judicial interpretation is just it's in your brain, and the brain is capable of some amazing experiences.
Right.
Whether there's an afterlife or not. This is how I conclude the book, is that it doesn't matter whether there's an afterlife or not. We don't live in the afterlife. We live in this life. So you got to make the most of this life. Lead a good life. Right. Good for goodness sakes.
What do you think? Do you think there is an afterlife?
No, I think there's probably not.
Okay.
I will be pleasantly surprised if there is. I'm okay with that.
You win either way, right?
Well, I think so. I mean, my friend, the late great Christopher Hitchens, said that the Christian heaven would be like celestial North Korea. He called it. Essentially, you have God who's all powerful, all knowing. Like a dictator.
Right.
That doesn't sound heavenly. Where's the challenges? You'd be bored. Eternity is a long time, especially near the end. So,
sounds like a marriage.
You're right. All right. Well, this is great, and we hope you come back, because you're one of our favorite guests.
We'll do 8 hours next time.
Yeah. We've had so much fun with you.
Yeah, we can do. I've done marathons. I've done Joe Rogan 3-4 hours. So next time let's do the ultra marathon.
This
sounds
is just
awesome.
an appetite. It sounds like. All right. So, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We didn't give this to you earlier. Yay! And please let everybody know where to go. I know you can go to skeptic.com.
Yeah, skeptic.com and michaelshermer.com. Those are the two best sites. The book, my book, of course, is Amazon or any of the other carriers, Barnes & Noble and so on. Fine bookstores everywhere, as they say.
Are there any bookstores left?
Yeah, give it another 10 years. It's all online.
There's the book. Check out the book. This is
on
awesome.
Earth. The scientific search for afterlife, immortality, and utopia. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Until next time,
seriously.
everybody, we are out. And please stick around for our other show. We have a great UFO researcher we'd love for you to stick around for. I'm Tony Sweet. This is Captain Ron. Please check out our YouTube channel. Just type in Truth Be Told. Go to our website, truthbetoldwebtv.com. Subscribe to our newsletter and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And iHeartRadio, iTunes, and all the other good stuff. So until then, we're out and have a good week.
Bye.